want to talk about this idea that a friend reminded me about today that lies at the heart of like everything we do in sort of our approach to food and wine and how we farm and relate to plants and animals, and that is the relationship between sort of funk and fruit and flowers, or between, I think, those sensations that we associate with the barnyard, which is like very close, of course, like to the farm. The barnyard lies within the farm, and the most transcendent things we can experience in wine. And in these wines, you feel like there's this place where the funk and the flowers, where they meet, and they're almost like woven together. It's almost like a fabric that's been stitched together, and you can't really feel where one ends and the other begins. There's this integration, and there's something very profound where they're meeting that is of neither of those worlds. I think I was like always like aware of it sort of aesthetically, sensually in the wines, but never like totally understood it until we arrived here and started doing this, and then it becomes like very clear that process is started or mirrored in all these different places in sort of the growing and production of the wine. And so I guess I wanted to talk about sort of what those places are and how we do things, really to like amplify that experience and that sensation. Like in that regard, like the most important thing, or things that sort of driven us, is to like let all the plants complete their life cycle. So allow them to go to flower, to set seed, to desiccate in the field, never to remove them, to basically like create as much biomass and as much like really food and fuel for potential fungi and microbes beneath the soil, and then to run, and to let the plants go to flower, to set seed, to desiccate, and then to run animals sort of behind them, to let the animals sort of trample it. And we sort of try to magnify that, by passing behind the animals with seeds. And this process does a bunch of amazing things. Like above ground, this is all incredible for insects and birds, or for like pollinators. These sort of plants decompose and sort of mix like with the manure and are consumed by microbial life. Is then to draw like that life like up into the air, and into the vine canopy itself. And so instead of spraying, sulfur, oil, copper, these like traditional things for an organic vineyard, to just spray teas that are basically a microbial like inoculant, which can just be a plant, right? Like a plant that already has like a diverse culture on it, or it can be some compost, with food and fuel for those microbes. So for us, like kelp and fish meal and biochar, molasses and oatmeal, and in a vortex brewer we create this tea that is aerobically brewed over a couple of days, and to create, it's really like intended to be a culture of like what's in the ground, and then to spray that into the vines. To do two things. Like one, to allow the plants like more access to nutrients, so they can like sort of have this like really strong immune response, and so they can fight disease for themselves, but also to create like basically microbial competition. So instead of trying to like get rid of pathogens like powdery mildew or like botrytis, to just sort of outcompete them, so to let them exist, but by filling as many niches as possible in the vine canopy with competition, not let them take over. And this has this an incredible like sort of advantage then, like sort of when you get like into the fermenter, because you're also like creating a culture for your fermentation. And then it has this other advantage in that when the plants kind of are exposed to more disease and are mounting this stronger like immune response, that immune response is the basis for flavor in the wine. So a lot of the phenols and other sort of precursors of the flowers and the fruit like in the wine, are sort of built here. And so rather than like, I guess, having, in a sense, like less of a barnyardy fungal microbial like presence in the wine and less of a fruit flower presence in the wine, we sort of want the maximum of both. We want a high population and very diverse of many kind of microbes active in the vineyard, in the soil, and then the vineyard, and then in the cellar. But then we also want grapes that are as intense as possible, so that we also have, to meet all of that, lots of potential to produce herbaceous aromas and floral aromas and fruity aromas, so that all those can meet like in the cellar. And then the final phase, of course, is like in the cellar to get out of the way of that. And so not to add, sulfuric crush, not to add anything to the wine. It's really no sulfur anywhere, no yeast, no enzymes, to really, let those things express themselves and magnify themselves in the fermentation. Like for me, you've really then set the stage, for this magic, this meeting of the fruit and the fungal and the bacterial. And that sort of like transitions into the magic of élevage. In the aging of the wine is where all those things are put together, like essentially, and are allowed to, like that's where that fabric like is woven. That dose of oxygen that is kind of coming in through the staves of the barrel, in our case older barrels, is sort of combining with the tannins that are the process, like one of the products of sort of growing in this way, no mow, no till, with a lot of competition and no irrigation, and all whole cluster, so in very thick skins. Those tannins basically place all these compounds that are produced by the fungi and bacteria in relationship with the compounds that are naturally produced by the fruits themselves. And over time, sort of those chains of tannins and these sort of flavor producing compounds become longer and longer and more like complex. In that moment, when they've developed like that you cease to be able to tell like one apart from the other. And that to me is sort of the ultimate thing with the wine, that you're smelling this complex of all this life in the field, the animals and insects and the plants in decaying form and fruiting form and flowering form and dried desiccated form. You're tasting that all together in a way that you can't like sort of separate it, and you feel it as just this incredibly complex like evocation of place.